going to present about the Consumer Protection Act 1999. The Consumer Protection Act, or more known as Act 599, came into force on the 15th of November 1999 to provide legislative provisions for consumer protection. The CPA is said to drive the establishments of various consumer protection mechanisms in Malaysia and also to bridge gaps that may occur in other major laws which may be inadequate in protecting consumers. The CPA has undergone several amendments since its enactment to cover various emerging issues relating to consumers, which include the inclusion of unfair contract terms and also inclusion of credit sale agreements of goods, and the most recent amendment was on the 23rd of July 2019, which is related to Tribunal for Consumer Claims in Malaysia. Okay, talking about the content of the Consumer Protection Act, there are 15 parts under Consumer Protection Act 1999, which can be seen in the slides now. Okay, as I mentioned earlier, the CPA, through many rounds of amendment, is a very comprehensive piece of legislation covering almost every aspects of consumer protection, ranging from misleading and deceptive conducts, false representation and unfair practices, safety of goods and services, unfair contract terms, and guarantees in respect of the supply of goods and services, and also about product liability to the establishment, structure and functions of the National Consumer Advisory Council, the Committee on Advertisement, and also the tribunals for consumer claims, and also other matters that is related to enforcement, offences, remedies, compensation, and etc. So every details of consumer protection are included under this act. To elaborate further about the Consumer Protection 1999, it applies to all consumer transactions in Malaysia. For example, transactions related to goods and services that are offered or supplied to one or more consumers in trade, including any trade transaction conducted through electronic. The government agency, which is primarily responsible for policy making and law enforcement on consumer protection in Malaysia, is the Ministry of Domestic Trade and Consumer Affairs, or more known as MDTCA. Not only in policy making and law enforcement, the MDTCA is also responsible for receiving consumer complaints and acts as a secretariat to the National Consumer Advisory Council, or more known as NCAC. It is an institution established by Minister of Domestic Trade and Consumer Affairs to advise on any relevant consumer issues and the implementation of the CPA, the Act. Okay, so this shows how concerned and or how helpful is the Consumer Protection Act for the consumers and the rights of the consumers.
Malaysian Consumer Protection Act 1999 basically protect the following right of the consumer. The first is the right to basic need. Consumer will be entitled to basic good and service. Second is the right to safety. Consumer will be protected against the product, production process, and service hazardous to life. Next is the right to choose. Consumer will be entitled access to a variety of product and service at competitive price, which is consumer get to choose and compare the product before proceed to purchase. Next is the right to be informed. Consumer get to be entitled to adequate information enabling the making of an informed choice or decision. The right to be heard. to advocate consumer interests, including the right of representation in governmental and other policies-making bodies. And lastly is the right to redress. It is to obtain a fair settlement or just claim.
Important point in this case are several amendments were made in 2002, 2003 and as well as in 2010. Listed some new contract to be increased tribunal members and increase in compound price from 10,000 to 25,000. Able to expand the scope of the deed to include electronic trade transaction. And last, evidence that the Act use remain relevant to provide more protection to consumers. It introduced two new parts, which is Part IIA Unfair Contract Term, which define the provision to protect consumer from unfair term in a standard form contract, and second is Part XIIA Committed on Advertisement, which provide power to the minister to establish a committee to monitor and take necessary action against suppliers with false and misleading advertisement.
CPA suffer from deficiency similar to CGA and ACL because it doesn't have a provision that reverses the burden of proof related to defect found with a specified period of time after shipment of goods. Therefore, a tribunal have been formed and has provided an alternative route other than the court to dismiss claim include in the CPA in Matang Plastic and Metal Works Industry Sdn Bhd.
Action taken for case related are some noteworthy features pertaining to the tribunal are as follows. The procedure are simpler than those governing court proceeding. The parties may not be represented by counsel. An award made or a settlement recorded by the tribunal is deemed to be an order of the magistrate court and enforceable accordingly. And lastly, the tribunal is required to make its award without delay and where practicable within 60 days from the first day of hearing.
The primary goal of Consumer Protection Act CPA 1999 is to ensure that customers get their cash worth of good and service. Consumers are allowed to protect products and services that are hazardous to their life and property from marketing cost fixed. The right to obtain information on the quantity, consistency, purity, strength, and quality of the product and service is the right of the customer. It is also the customer's responsibility to purchase goods at a fair price. Consumer Protection Act CPA 1999 assists consumers to obtain accurate, unbiased information about the product and service they are purchased. This will enable them to make the best choice based on their interests and prevent them from being mistreated or misled by businesses. Consumer protection policies, law, and regulation help increase consumer welfare by ensuring that businesses can be held accountable. And lastly, as a consumer, we should know and be aware of our rights as a consumer and use them wisely. That's all from us. Thank you.